Hey there, Duke fans. Welcome to episode number 663 of the Duke Basketball Roundup. We are coming to you about a few hours, probably 5 or 6 hours after Duke takes down Wofford in what was a historic game. We will talk about the history around this game in just a minute. I am Donald Wine. I am your host for this episode. I will tell you right up front, I watched this game until literally 5 seconds before we started recording because I was at a soccer game. I had to come home, I had to go to a baby shower, and then I came home and watched this game. Lots to talk about this game, but it was a lot of fun to catch up on. We have Jason Evans with us. First of all, Jason, where are you? Because you are not in Atlanta. I see you. It appears to be a hotel room. I know hotel rooms, and I know you're in one.
I'm in a hotel room at the Wynn Casino in Las Vegas, Nevada. I have a view out my room. If we were doing this on YouTube, I would turn the camera around and you guys could see I have a view out my room of the Sphere. The Sphere is
I was about to ask. Yeah.
Everything that you've heard about the Sphere, it exceeds expectations. And I am about to, in about an hour, which is one of the reasons I'm going to drop off this fairly soon, because I got to get ready and get dressed and stuff. In about an hour, I'm going to a Sphere show. I'm going to go see the U2 experience. Super excited about that. Donald, if you just got done watching the game, this is going to be the least prepared we have ever been. I have prepared 0 notes. I watched the game at a sports book this morning. And I say morning because it was 9 a.m.
It was 9 a.m., yeah.
And I want to just really quickly, I have lost over $1,200, mostly playing craps so far this weekend. It has been a brutally bad run of craps. I then said, I'm done with craps. I said, I'm going to sit down at a blackjack table. I then ran into a brutally bad run of blackjack. The only wager that I have won all weekend is Duke minus 25 to cover against Wofford, and I cleared it easily, baby.
So Jason, you know the cardinal rule: never bet against or for your team because you will always be disappointed. Except in this case, you're disappointed everywhere else in Vegas. But Jason, I will say,
But I've been having a great time. It's been a great weekend. I'm having so much fun.
You're going
away money left and right.
You're going to the Sphere. This is the big thing of the weekend, and people are going to sit there and say, well, okay, Jason's going to the Sphere in like 5 minutes. Like, what's Donald going to do? Enter Scott Rich. Scott Rich, how you doing, man? He's coming. He's here.
It sounds like I'm the only one who actually prepared for this podcast.
No, be clear. I prepared, but I was watching and preparing at the same time. I do that a lot. Multitask.
Jason, I will say I was home in Michigan a couple weekends ago, and my dad had just come back from seeing the Grateful Dead in the Sphere. And he was still riding high, both literally and figuratively, from seeing the Grateful Dead in the Sphere. So something tells me you're going to have a great time tonight.
I'm looking forward to it. It's the U2 experience. It's not U2. It's kind of this virtual U2 thing, but I've heard
it's the recording essentially of what they did. I will say I went to Vegas, several times when they were building the Sphere, and I always had a room that faced them building the Sphere. It is massive. But what we are going to talk about today is not necessarily the Sphere that's in Las Vegas. It was the Sphere that went into the hoop in Cameron Indoor Stadium a lot of times. Duke takes down Wofford 86-35. They are 3-1 on the year. I will say this. First of all, Duke, 35 points allowed against Wofford, the lowest number from an opponent in the shot clock era. You have to go back to 1968 for the last time someone scored fewer than 35 points. Also, Duke, 51-point win, the largest margin of victory since November 12th, 2019, when Duke defeated Central Arkansas 105-54. We're going to we normally do the headlines first, but because Jason has to go, Jason, I want to just give it to you for your general thoughts about this game. So go ahead.
So the first thing is I was watching this game and I was like, is this the same team that I saw play at State Farm Arena against Kentucky? Because it sure didn't look like the same team. And granted, I'm going to admit right away that Wofford and Kentucky not really on the same level as opponents may happen to go. But just what Duke was trying to do, the way they were running their offense was completely different, in my opinion, from what we saw against Kentucky. Kentucky was all one-on-one play. In this game, it was all passing. Duke ends up, and I'm sure you guys are going to get into this, I'm probably stepping on stuff, but just jumped out of the box score. How could you not notice 24 assists on 30 made baskets? That's like next up. That's 80%, people, if you can't do that math. That is,
I did the math. Yeah, that's
yeah,
good math.
You don't need my math PhD to get that.
Yeah.
it is a ridiculous number of assists. And I also noticed, like, hey, Cooper Flagg, 8 shots attempted. Con Knipple, 6 shots attempted. Tyrese Proctor, 9. Caleb Foster, 6. Common Malawatch, 7. Are you sensing a theme here? We were sharing the ball in terms of who got to finish the play more than we have at any point in this season. If you told me that Duke was going to score 86 points, blow a team out of the gym with Cooper Flagg and Con Knipple combining for 16 points, I would have been like, really? By the way, Donald, key stat game thing, we almost had a surprise stat leader in terms of points scored because Isaiah Evans had 14 points scored. Tyrese Proctor had 15. We almost had Isaiah Evans lead the team in scoring. Frankly, Isaiah was great. I mean, like, I'm sure we're going to get emails from people who say, why didn't this guy play against Kentucky? He was 4 of 7 from 3. Why was this guy not playing? I don't know that answer. I'm not John Shire. But it was an incredibly fun game to watch. I like this version of the team. I really love this version of Common Malawatch. I thought the team really was looking for him more than they have. We got a Patrick Ngongba sighting. Patrick plays his first game and it's just like absurd on the offensive boards. He had one sequence where he had 3 offensive rebounds like within 5 seconds of each other. Like, guys, can you hit a shot? Because I'm going to keep getting the offensive rebound. So it was great to get him out there. And it just, again, you love the way the team bounced back. When I saw the line in Vegas of -25, I only put $50 on it. I don't know what I was thinking. I should have put more on it because it was almost a sure thing that after the way Duke played against Kentucky, they would come out and play significantly better at home. We need to see them do this away from Cameron a little bit. I mean, that would be nice. But a fabulous game. And last thing we should mention was that Sion James apparently was not injured for very long. We speculated that he probably wouldn't play this weekend. Oh, no, he played. And he was once again just excellent, I thought, even though he doesn't necessarily fill up the stat book that much in terms of points, just 5 points. But, 4 rebounds, 4 assists, all over the place on defense. I guess the defense is the story of the game. All right, I've rambled.
No, so Jason, we're going to
go
talk about a lot of what you said after you're gone. But before you leave, I want to go through the headlines because one of them might include you in this. So I'm going to start with I have 3 headlines that I picked out. And the first one is from Sammy Stew. And Sammy Stew, I believe, a first-time emailer, or at least the first time getting on the pod. But Sammy Stew writes, Duke takes the W. Wofford can't make a shot or get one off. That was pretty cool.
That's clever.
George Papazikos, I believe I pronounced it right. If not, I apologize. Went with something very, very near and dear to my heart. And Jason, probably yours as well, since you're in Atlanta. He wrote, scattered, smothered, and covered. Wofford Housed for Blue Devil brunch. I loved that one. Absolutely. That's one of my favorite that I've ever had on this show. And then finally, Lee Maxson writes, Duke does the gritty. No doubt Jason is giddy. But please remember that Wofford is really, really not pretty. So I like that one as well.
Very
also,
clever.
Thank you for keeping it clean, Lee, on the podcast.
Yeah, we know what he really meant, though.
Oh yes, that's why I read everything he wrote, so he was right on point. Jason, I know you need to get out of here, so last words from you before Scott and I take over.
Well, I mean, I think my last word is that it's after that Kentucky game, it's time for Duke to again turn up the opponent situation, and I'm really I'm glad the team has this effort and this performance to think about as they get ready for going up to Arizona next Friday, which is a huge, huge game. We didn't really talk about this that much, Donald, but losing to Kentucky, even though we didn't feel that terrible about the loss, we thought it was things that could be corrected. It does start to put a little bit of pressure on Duke in these other major non-conference games. You don't want to be making a case for a number 1, number 2 seed, whatever it may be, and say, oh yeah, but we lost our big non-conference games. You need to win those games. Ideally, you win more than you lose of those quad 1A games, which is what these games have been. And we've got one currently in the L. And so I guess, I shouldn't look ahead to Arizona before Wofford. Well, Wofford's in the rear view now, even though you guys are still talking about it. I'm looking forward to Arizona. And that's a huge, huge game for the Blue Devils.
Yeah, and I will say you mentioned Sion James was injured against Kentucky, came back against Wofford. Maybe that is because we have almost a week off before that game in
Yeah.
Arizona next weekend. He's able to play, get a few minutes, and then able to rest for a whole week. Jason, we're going to say goodbye to you. Enjoy the U2 experience in the Sphere. Scott and I are going to talk about other spheres that are orange and go into orange holes with nets on them. So
But I thought we were
enjoy
keeping this
that.
clean, Donald.
I tried. I tried. My bad. That's my bad.
Bye, guys.
Jason, good to see you. Scott, I bring you back in because I want to get into the good of this game, and there's a lot to discuss in this game. But I'm going to lead you with this. In the post-game press conference, there obviously the focus was on the defense, and Tyrese Proctor, who we will talk about, I'm sure, in a little bit. Tyrese Proctor mentioned something that I thought was very interesting about the defense against Kentucky and how it related to how they played today against Wofford. He said, quote, I think we lost the last game from our defense, defensive transition, stuff like that. So cleaning that up, learning from it, and executing well today. We cleaning up that was the biggest thing. We beat ourselves in that Kentucky game. We played hard. We competed every possession, but it was just little things defensively, miscommunications on split actions, rebounding. I think we just cleaned those things up, specifically defensive transition. I'm looking at this box score, 35 points. Again, the lowest in the shot clock era since going back to 1968. 14 points in the first half they allowed, only 21 in the second half, and even the second half kind of felt like both teams are just throwing, passing the ball back and forth to each other. This defensive effort was incredible, and it was a great response after the loss in against Kentucky, which, we talked about this. I didn't think it was mainly defensive struggles that cost us against Kentucky, but it's clear the team thought so, and the team responded in kind.
To me, this game, we obviously John Shire does not follow Duke fans on Twitter. Obviously, John Shire does not
He's
check
not
the
on Twitter.
message
Yeah.
boards. But it almost felt to me like John Shire was checking a bunch of boxes of all of the sky is falling complaints that we were hearing after the Kentucky game. People were terrified about Sion James and what his status was going to be. He comes in and he plays well. Check that box. People were a bit anxious about the depth up front after we saw how much it hurt when Kaman got those cramps against Kentucky. We roll out Pat Ngongba, and we'll probably talk about him more, but he looked very at home on the court in Cameron Indoor, which is a lot more than a lot of freshman bigs can say in their first game. Check that box. People were worried about our three-point shooting. Are we going to have that poor of a three-point shooting night again? We shot 16 for 38 from three. We looked good from deep. We checked that box. And then last one, I think, and this, probably is a bit skewed by that last minute in Kentucky, but there's the big question of, is this just going to be the Cooper Flag show, or is this a well-rounded, complete team? And that's the box I think we checked more than any else. Like you mentioned, Cooper did not fill up the stat sheet. He only had, I believe, 8 points in this game. Everyone else contributed. And this is something that I think was the biggest question entering the season. Was this just going to be all Cooper Flag, or did Duke actually assemble the pieces around him to complement his game? Obviously, against Kentucky, we leaned on him probably more than I think even John Shire would admit that he wanted to. We came out today and didn't double down on that. We went back to what we saw in the exhibitions, what we saw in the first two games of the season, albeit against lower ranked opponents. We saw the ball movement. We saw getting everyone involved in the offense. We saw the assist numbers rising significantly. It felt like it was a very purposeful game to get back on the horse and sort of put that outlier performance against Kentucky. And I think a lot about this game, and you guys talked about this on the pod, a lot about that game really was outlier performance, and we still arguably should have won. But we put a lot of those concerns, are those outliers, was that a one-off, to bed, I think, in this performance. Unless we forget, Wofford is not a 300 in Ken Palm rankings type of team. Wofford is a decent mid-major opponent. Wofford is a school that's been to the tournament a couple
Hmm.
times over the last, decade or so. They were picked fourth in the SoCon preseason. This is not us beating up against New Jersey Institute of Technology. This is us beating up against a team roughly of the caliber of maybe a 15, 16 seed that we might see in the tournament. This is not something that I think we should be, just laughing off of, oh, we annihilated Wofford. We're more concerned about Kentucky. We annihilated a team that many ACC teams, will probably be in the lower half of the ACC, will be about Wofford level when it all said and done with all the analytics and the metrics and the rankings and all that stuff. So this was not an annihilation of a D2 opponent. This was annihilation of a competitive mid-major team.
Yeah, and I mean, expanding on that point, right? First of all, we talked about Wofford. You mentioned that they're like a 15, 16 seed. I mean, on the preview, Jason and I said more of a 14, right? Like you see the Wofford, they're like, man, Wofford's given, middle, West Virginia a scare in the first round, like that sort of thing. And so clearly they wanted to approach this game and say, hey, we're not going to take them lightly. We're going to take them seriously because this is the team that can scare us. And we don't need any more scares after what happened against Kentucky. I will say this. You mentioned, and Jason kind of mentioned this, right? The division of the distribution of shots, how even it was for the most part amongst all of our guys. We played all the way down to, the end of the bench, but really we had 11 guys that got fairly significant playing time in this game. And I like the fact that one, we were able to do that, but also that, yeah, again, there was no drop off when you went to the bench. Isaiah Evans comes off the bench, gets 14 points, almost leads the team in scoring. And maybe this was his breakout party, but also it shows, hey, we have this caliber off the bench, and it's not just the three transfers when they come into the game. Our freshmen can also do damage. The idea that this team can get scoring from anywhere can be a gift and a curse, right? You want to have some sort of established quote air hierarchy of who's going to get the ball, who's going to have this. But it's great that if again, you know, Patrick Ngamba gets these minutes because Patrick Ngamba, we could have used him against Kentucky when we had all the foul trouble. Later on, when we have foul trouble, hey, we're going to throw him in there and he's going to be able to not be blinded by the lights or feel like he is a step behind everybody else. And I think that's great. The one thing that I will say about our defense is that our defense did it through turnovers and through steals, right? They didn't do it through blocks, which is what we're normally thinking that we're going to be getting. You know, Malawach doesn't have a block. I don't think Cooper had a block, or maybe he had one.
They
Or
have
sorry,
him
he had
down
two.
as
He had
having
two.
two.
They count him as two, yes. But I think usually we're sitting there saying, oh, we probably have 5, 6, 7 blocks and maybe 8 or 9 steals. We had 11 steals. We forced 19 turnovers. And a lot of that wasn't in just the defense. It was just them taking bad shots because our defense made them take bad shots and they were missing them. There wasn't a lot of open shots that Wofford took where we're like, oh, well, that's going in. Oh, he missed it. Oh, lucky for us. We're going to go the other way. It was, oh, that's a terrible shot. Great defense. Ball goes out. We're going the other way.
So it was interesting. When you watch the game, and I forget who the color commentator was on this game, but he was sort of banging the drum all game of, oh, Wofford is getting open shots and missing them. There is, Duke is getting a little bit lucky. Duke is, letting them have three good 3-point shots, and that's still an issue. There were definitely possessions where that was the case, but for the most part, what I saw was, yes, there were shots that looked clean, but Duke closing out with its length was
Hmm.
affecting those shots. There are shots that look open at the front, but when you see Cooper Flagg coming out at you and, extending his arm and, potentially going up to block that shot, what looks like an open shot ends up being an affected shot, even if it doesn't necessarily, come across or look that way on first glance. We've talked, you guys have talked a lot on the podcast about 3-point defense. And, when you hold your opponent to a good, a low 3-point percentage, is that luck or is that something about your defense? To me, in this game, a lot of that was actually Duke's defense. A lot of that was Duke's length and Duke's size coming to bear against the team where that was undersized relative to Duke, because every team is going to be undersized relative to Duke. Who knows if that's going to be a trend going forward? Obviously, it wasn't against Kentucky. That seemed to potentially have been something that we emphasized in practice this week. But it'll be interesting to see going forward. Is Duke a good 3-point defense team because of that length? Or was this, a Wofford having an off night? But lest we forget, even if Wofford shot better, Duke still wins this game by 30. So that should not be the take home, by any means of this game, regardless of what you think about Duke's 3-point defense.
Yeah, and again, 3-point defense, you mentioned some people think it's more luck than skill. I tend to disagree with the luck portion of it. Yes, their luck is present in all these games, right? In every facet of the game. You need something in the form of luck to get through some of these games. But the way they close out and the way that they're controlled in doing it, right? Like they're not doing it they're not doing it by fouling, right? Because some guys will come in your face and they'll run right at you and without regard with, oh, I'm going to block a shot. Doesn't matter. I just want to stop him. And that means I'm going to go, and foul him and send him to the line. And that's fine. But then you have guys who will close out. They're very controlled when they do it. Shane Battier, for example, would close out and he'd put a hand in your face. And it doesn't matter if he was 30 feet away or 10 feet away. He would figure out a way to get it to affect your shot to the point where you would not feel like you had any rhythm. And even if you caught the ball, you go, man, I'm wide open. You look in the corner of your eye and you saw Shane Battier, you're like, damn, I gotta get this shot off because otherwise he's going to be in my grill. That is what this team can do with how tall they are, how long they are, and how strong they are. And being in a position where no matter where they are on the court, they can close gaps quickly and they can get their hand up in the air and affect a shot from anywhere on the court. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the guy in front of you. Like a Velociraptor can be the two on the flank that come through and affect you. So I really appreciate that. But
Like a
yeah.
Velociraptor, it can be the two on the flank. Where did that one come from, good sir?
I watched Jurassic Park a lot this week, and all of the iterations of Jurassic Park. I love Jurassic Park. Shout out to Velociraptors; they're the best. Let me switch to the offense because, of course, against Kentucky, our offense was kind of anemic at times, and we couldn't hit water from a boat. Well, we were fine today, right? Especially from three, 16 for 38. That's 42.1%. The one thing I will talk about, we hit our free throws. We only had 11 free throws, but we hit 10 of them, 90.9% from the line. Would love that, right? Of course, we would love 100%, but that's great. As Jason mentioned, 24 assists on 30 field goals, 80%. Points from turnovers, we outscored them 17 to 6. In the paint, 22 to 16, Duke. Second chance points, again, 17 to 5, Duke. Bench points, led by Isaiah Evans, 31 to 5. We talked about how we only had 6 points from the bench against Kentucky, and that was way off of where we were. We're back to where we normally are in the 30s and 40s when it comes to our bench. And then finally, rebounding. They missed a ton of shots and they did not get a lot of rebounds. 43 to 29, we out rebound them. And again, that, turns into a lot of points on the other end. So I'm very happy with how they responded. Yes, it's against Wofford. No, I don't care because you have to rebound against somebody. And I like the fact that they were able to put the Kentucky game behind them, learn from their mistakes, and go out and do some damage.
I think the most common theme of concern coming out of the Kentucky game, I think, was why was John Shire going so hard in the ISO ball with Cooper Flag
Mhm.
in the last minute, and also broadly in the last 5, 10 minutes of the game where things sort of stagnated and that lead we had built up slowly chipped away. And that was a valid question. But I think what we saw today is that the problem is not that John Shire does not have an offense, that John Shire cannot come up with good plays, that he cannot implement an offense. I feel like that sometimes has gotten blown out of proportion just based off of some, particular late game scenarios that lead to losses that, of course, stick in Duke fans' heads. The offense as a whole was fantastic today, as it was in 2 of our 3 previous games this year. This 5-out offense that we're running works. The ball movement was fantastic. Jason, reported that assist number on made baskets. That's something that any team in the country would like against a D2 team, let alone again a solid mid-major. This Duke team has the capacity to run good offensive sets, to be well balanced, and to get open shots from offense rather than just being out talenting or out bigging the opponent. there is a question of why didn't we see that down the last 10 minutes in the Kentucky game? That's a question only John Shire can answer. But this is not the case that Duke does not have the capability to do this. The next step for this team from going good to great and hopefully great to the higher ceilings that we're aspiring to is, are we running this offense when the pressure is on? Are we running these quick sets where everyone on this all five offensive players are touching the ball before Tyrese Proctor gets an open three? Can we run that with a minute to go in a tied game? Or are we just defaulting back into Cooper Flag, go be the best player on the court? That's the next step for this team. I think hopefully this Duke team assuaged some of those concerns with this performance. But now the question is, can we look like this against Arizona on Friday? And can we do that for a larger portion of the game rather than sort of going back into that ISO ball, hero ball, which has been a problem for us in the last couple of years?
An Arizona team that just lost to Wisconsin yesterday and gave up 103 points, I believe, in the process, including 41 to one player. So we'll obviously talk about that later in the week. But I want to get to some of the players because obviously we had a lot of standout performances that we need to discuss. But I want to start with two. I want to start with Caleb Foster and Tyrese Proctor because I have been one of those people that since the preseason has said that the guard play with those two needs to be on point. And a lot of people have said, a lot of the pundits have said that Duke will go as far as Tyrese Proctor and Caleb Foster will take them. Well, Tyrese Proctor, 15 points, 4 for 7 from three rebounds, 2 assists, and a steal. Caleb Foster, 13 points, 1 rebound, 2 assists, and 2 steals. I thought they were magnificent on the afternoon. And the other thing is, when we did the stats game and we are kind of preparing for the season, we're like, okay, like which one of these guys is going to be the ball handler? Which one's going to be one that distributes the ball and is the facilitator? And the answer might be neither of them, right? As far as facilitation. But the idea is they are able to find guys and set up the chess pieces on the board so that the big pieces can strike. They may not be the bishop or the king or the knight, but they can strike, or the queen. So the idea is they're able to score and they're able to kind of draw guys out so that they can open up the floor for everybody else. And they have sort of the hockey assist. One of the plays that I have, the play of the game idea is there's a couple of plays where it looked like touch passes where, hey, I'm not the guy, but I see the guy in the corner, and to do this, I'm going to pass it to this guy who already sees that guy open in the corner. So I'm just going to touch pass it to him. He's going to touch pass it to the guy in the corner. Boom, 3-pointer. So I like the fact that they're able to see the floor and adjust to the game that is being handed to them and take it to the next level. That's what they need to do the whole season. And I think this is a nice start because, again, we've seen games where one of them might have a good half, but not have a full, complete game. And I'm not sure that this was a complete game for them, but it was closer to that than we've seen in the first three.
The era of the ball dominant point guard, the shortest guy on your team, quickest, shortest guy on the team being the guy who brings the ball up and touches it the most. That's what I wanted to be when I grew up, because I wanted to be the guy who was dribbling the ball and bringing it up the court, because that was, how you get involved in the game, right? That's a relic of a bygone era now. That belies how old we are at this point. That's what we grew up aspiring to be. We've seen in the modern NBA, and this is now coming into the college game, that you don't need a point guard, a guy who's bringing the ball up and initiating the offense every possession. Duke doesn't have that this year, and I think that's fine. We are going to see Caleb Foster bringing the ball up, but then immediately making a first pass to Con Knipple or Cooper Flag, and they're the ones who are actually doing the playmaking. And that's fine. This would be a problem. This would be a bigger point of concern if this team also didn't have Con Knipple and Cooper Flag, if it didn't have Sion James off the bench. Then, yeah, you need that ball dominant point guard. You need the guy to be the maestro and orchestrate the offense. But that's not a necessity for this Duke team. And I know that storyline is good. Every time Duke loses a game this year, that's going to be the storyline: is who's Duke's point guard? Where's Duke's guard play?
For better or worse, right? Like it's not even going to necessarily be their fault, but it's
yeah,
like the quarterback on the football team, right? That's the first person they're going to turn to and say, what did you do to affect this game?
Exactly. And that's exactly my point, which is That's, I think, by design. This is not Caleb Foster and Tyrese Proctor not putting up huge assist numbers isn't necessarily a flaw in this team. That's by design. The playmaking is going to be actually pretty distributed. And honestly, maybe Cooper Flag more often than not. We saw that against Kentucky. We probably overdid it against Kentucky, but I still think the best version of this team is when Cooper Flag is initiating the offense and being the playmaker. So we need Caleb Foster and Tyrese Proctor and Sion James to be solid shooters, to create when necessary, to be competent creators late in the shot clock, and to be dominant defensively. We saw that today. We saw that from Tyrese for the first half against Kentucky. Caleb had an off shooting night, but again, his shot is not broken. We saw that today. It's probably the stupid balls that they played with in the Champions Classic for some reason more than anything. So I was very encouraged by that today. But again, I think that hopefully as the season goes on, that won't be the lead point in every article and every column and every post game analysis, because this is a different team. Jon Scheyer built this team around Cooper Flag, not around Tyrese Proctor and Caleb Foster, and that's fine. And that's how we need to contextualize this team and its performance as a bit of a more modern basketball, positionless basketball team, rather than you're the point guard, you start the offense, you get 10 assists a game.
Speaking of Cooper Flag, he had a game that was the definition of why the 10-5-5 stat game exists, because it's super hard to do. He had 8 points, 9 rebounds, 6 assists, 3 steals, and 2 blocks. He did not get a 10-5-5 game by our standards, which must include 10 points. But even if you included 10 of anything, he was still 1 rebound shy of a 10-5-5. That is how hard it is to do a 10-5-5 in the college game. But also it shows you that Cooper Flag, and it took 13 minutes and 15 seconds. I checked. He didn't score his first points until 6:45 left in the first half. And I like the fact that, again, he was affecting the game in other ways, but he didn't have to score. And they've said this on the program a couple of nights ago, or a couple of games ago. They said he could score 30 points one game, he could score 10 and affect the game the same. I didn't realize when he scored his first points that those were his first points, because it felt like he was involved in every single play that we were doing on both offense and defense.
Yeah. Cooper Flag is a very different player than number one overall prospects, than potential number one overall picks. And it's something that, that every announcer and every analyst has said a couple of times, but still bears repeating, because you're going to look at the box score and say, oh, Cooper Flag only scored 8 points. He must have had an off night. That's not who he is. That's not his game. And that's why, when we were talking back in, I think it was June when you had me on to sort of make prognostications about the season, one of the things I said was, I don't think Cooper Flag is going to be this team's leading scorer. I don't think Cooper Flag is going to score, 15, 20 points a game, because that's not how he impacts the game. We saw he can do that. We saw he has that in his capabilities in Kentucky with his 28-point performance. But is that the best version of him? I don't know. We did lose against Kentucky, and we did just beat Wofford by 50 points. I think that's going to be something that Jon Scheyer, as he figures out this team's identity, is going to have to determine, because there's going to be a lot of noise at Cooper Flag saying, why aren't you scoring 20 points a game? Why aren't you putting up Zion Williamson, RJ Barrett, Marvin Bagley numbers? And by all accounts, Cooper Flag doesn't care. But it's a lot easier to care. It's a lot easier not to care when you're playing high school basketball than it is when you're on ESPN and you're the leading story on SportsCenter every time there's a Duke game. So that's going to be a story to watch. Is he going to continue to be that complimentary guy, that 10-5-5 guy, rather than that 20-point a game guy? Because I think that's the best version of this Duke team, is when he is playing that complementary facilitating role on offense, rather than always going and hunting his shot. He can do that. And I guarantee you that's still the game plan next time there's a tie game with 30 seconds to go, is to get the ball to Cooper Flag. But we need to get to a point where it's not getting the ball to Cooper Flag one-on-one, and that's the game. We need to get to a point where it's get the ball to Cooper Flag and he initiates where he has options, and he can use his basketball instincts and IQ to make the best play, even if it's not him putting the ball in the basket.
Yeah, I don't know that I I agree with you on like 98% of what you said, right? I think him scoring 8 points is not necessarily a great thing every single time, right? Like that, but I also think that you're right in that Cooper Flag could redefine what a superstar stat line looks like in college, in the sense that, like you said, when we think about the greats, we think about the guys who scored a lot of points. They may have added other things, but they're the ones that when the chips were on the table, these guys had the basketball in their hands and they were making a play and they were scoring 30 points and they were dunking, dunking people out of the gym and things like that. But they weren't. We're not talking about the guy like we're not talking about guys with Malik Brown stats, right? Where they have 0 points and 8 rebounds. We're not talking about that. But Cooper Flag, the fact that he is able to almost have a 10-5-5 in almost any category is something that could redefine in a way what we think about when we think about superstar stats, because those are superstar stats. The fact that you're like when you think about you look at the play by play, Cooper Flag is almost involved in like 80% of them, both on offense and defense. And that is what you want to see from a team standpoint. It's just the NBA types of people who are like, oh, well, this guy must be trash because he only had 8 points. When he had 26 points against Kentucky, everybody was hooting and hollering like, man, this dude is nice. And today I'm hearing, oh, well, Cooper Flag is maybe not that great because he only had 8 points. Again, neglecting the fact that he had 9 rebounds, 6 assists, 3 steals, and 2 blocks. How many people do that on a regular basis is the question. But I think Cooper Flag, what he did today, he's going to get his points. If he's getting, in my mind, if he's getting in the teens, he's affecting the game and on almost every single play, and that is what we want. I want to point out two more guys that I thought had decent games, and one had a really good game. First of all, welcome to the game, Patrick Ngongba. 2.6 rebounds, 2 assists, and 1 steal in his debut. He had been out for most of preseason, in fact, all of preseason, with some sort of injury to his foot, and had been in a boot. And against Kentucky, he dressed but didn't play, and everyone was kind of like, "What's up with Patrick Ngongba?" Well, he finally gets his debut. I thought he did very, very well for the minutes he was on the floor, and he was very efficient in what he did. And then Isaiah Evans, eh, look, you get off the bench and score 14 points, shooting 4 for 7 from three. Like that is a welcome party. By if I've ever seen one. And Isaiah Evans, yes, it may be against Wofford, and people might dismiss it, but the fact is we need guys who are down on the bench to be able to come in and microwave their way into the game. And the way that Isaiah Evans got his 14 points coming off the bench, there was a point where he had 8 points in 4 minutes. And he just came off the bench, did his scoring, and he was like, okay, you need me for defense? Great. You want me to come to the bench because someone else is ready to come back in? Also great. Like, thanks for having me. I'll be back in a little while. I need guys who want to be who can come on the floor, do what they need to do in a quick, efficient way, and then cede to other people as those roles are defined. But I thought that Isaiah Evans did a great way of introducing himself once again to the party and saying, "Hey, I am a guy that you can rely on to score some points in a short period of time if that is possible or necessary."
There's a large segment of the Duke fan base who's going to look at the box score today and say, "Great, this is Pat and Isaiah's coming out party. I can't wait to see them play 5-10 minutes a game down the stretch. I can't see them, play 10. Wait to see them play 10 minutes against Arizona." I would
And they may
throw,
not, right?
yeah, I was about to say I would throw a whole bucket of ice water on that. As good as well as they both played, we've seen time and time again that John Shire is most comfortable with a 7-8 man rotation like Coach K did for decades and decades. I don't think that's going to change. But what I do think changes now is if Sion James gets injured, if there's foul trouble up front, then we go to that ninth, 10th guy on the bench, and we're comfortable doing it. I still don't see any scenario in which Duke is regularly playing more than 8 guys a game, or more than 8 guys in the regular rotation getting more than 10 minutes a game. That ship has sailed. We're going to talk about it every summer until the end of time, and it's never going to happen. I'm convinced of that. But we're going to see games where who that 8th man is will be different. That eighth man may be Isaiah Evans in certain situations when our offense is stagnant, when we need that extra shooter. That eighth man might be Patrick Ngongba if there's foul trouble up front, if, God forbid, there's an injury situation or anything like that. That is depth that is still hugely useful and is something that will pay dividends down the line because there will be injuries, there will be foul trouble. That's what happens over a long basketball season. But just because we saw Isaiah Evans score 14 points tonight, I hope Duke fans don't, feel whiplash when we perhaps don't see him for much time against Arizona on Friday. The last thing I'll say on these two guys is Pat Ngongba only scored 2 points. His stat line doesn't jump off the screen, but it says something that he was on the court for 10 minutes and looked like he belonged. We have seen time and time again with Duke bigs, highly rated 5-star bigs in their freshman year, who just they seem lost. They don't know what they're doing when they first get on the court, and Duke quite literally can't play them, right? We remember how amazing Derek Lively was down the stretch. We forget that during the first stretch of the season, he was almost unplayable for long stretches, right? The fact that Pat Ngongba looked like he belonged, was confident, he didn't turn the ball over. That was that's going to be my play of the game, was a play where I think he did something, super under the radar in that regard. The fact that he was making the right defensive plays, the fact that he was using his size to contribute on the offensive glass, even if he wasn't scoring, that is super, super encouraging. And again, there will be foul trouble. Kaman will play like a guy who's only played basketball for 5 years eventually. And in that game, we're going to need Pat Ngongba for 5 minutes. And I feel so much more confident that we're going to be able to weather those 5 minutes when that game comes after this performance tonight.
So to close out the good, you mentioned the rotation and the amount of people who came in, and the fact that we talked about two guys who didn't play against Kentucky. In the case of Isaiah Evans, getting limited minutes before that. And John Shire addressed that after the game in the press conference, and he said, in part, quote, "Every game is a little bit of an experiment because it's my first time with all these guys except Caleb and Tyrese. We have 11 good players, but it's hard to play 11 guys. How deep can you go? Who can be ready? A lot of that comes down to defense and rebounding, but I'm looking and I'm well aware. Just because we start a certain way or play a certain way now doesn't mean it's going to end up that way. This is a long process of how we have to grow throughout the season." So again, it kind of goes back to what we heard during the summer, where John Shire might in certain situations go, hey, let's throw this guy into the situation and see how he fares out. It could be where you have an Isaiah Evans night where he scores 14 points, or it could be like, last year where we kind of played some guys and they come in for a couple, a minute or so, and you're like, oh, that's not working. Okay, we tried it. Go back to what we are already doing. He, like you said, he has the 8 guys that he's going to be solid with, and you're going to see play 10 plus minutes every game. The question is going to be those guys that are 9, 10, 11. That's Darren Harris, Isaiah Evans, and Patrick Ngongba at this point. Do they fare into a game? Again, there might be a game where we see Darren Harris before Isaiah Evans. We might see Patrick Ngongba due to foul trouble because, guys are in foul trouble. We might see, guys due to, knock on wood, guy picks up a knock and you have to shift the rotations a little bit. Those are things that John Shire has to kind of think about on the fly. But the idea is to have all these guys to stay ready so they ain't got to get ready, and you always be ready. And I think in the case of Isaiah Evans today, he was ready because he knew that his number was going to get called, and he knew that this was a game that he needed to shine. Okay, let's take a quick break because we want to talk about the other stuff from this game, the bad, the play of the game, and the player of the week. But stay tuned. We'll talk about all of that on the other side of this break. Spark something uncommon this holiday with just the right gift from Uncommon Goods.
That's right, Duke fans. The busy holiday season is here, and Uncommon Goods makes it less stressful with incredible hand-picked gifts for everyone on your list, all in one spot. Gifts that spark joy, wonder, delight, and it's exactly what I wanted feeling. Somehow, they've created a place where you can find the perfect gift for anyone.
Perfect gifts indeed, Jason. I just got an acupuncture mat so that I can hit those pressure points that bother me on a regular basis. And they have a can holder for the shower so I can relax with my favorite beverage if I need a moment to wash the day away.
Yeah, I wonder what beverage that is. Okay, folks, when you shop at Uncommon Goods, you're supporting artists and small independent businesses. Many of their handcrafted products are made in small batches. So shop now before they sell out this holiday season. And with every purchase you make at Uncommon Goods, they give $1 back to a nonprofit partner of your choice. They have donated Donald more than $3 million to date.
That's a lot of money. So to get 15% off your next gift, go to uncommongoods.com/DukeBB. That's DUKEBB. Uncommongoods.com/DukeBB for 15% off. Don't miss out on this limited time offer. Uncommon Goods. We're all out of the ordinary. All right, we are back. We are discussing Duke taking down Wofford in just historic fashion, a 51-point victory, 86-35. We're going to shift to the things that we thought were bad from this game, and there isn't a lot. I'll be honest, because this was a pretty clinical beatdown of the Wofford Terriers. But Scott, I go to you first. What did you have from the bad, or things that we just need to work on?
I mean, at this point, you're nitpicking when you're looking for the bad in the 50-point game. I will say Mason Gillis goes 1 for 6 from three-point land today. I think the worries that he might have picked up Jack White syndrome are getting more and more realistic. He is an excellent shooter. He shot 40+% from three last year. That is his reputation. It hasn't shown up in games this year, and he is getting good looks. Now, I think that Mason Gillis is still impacting the game in other ways. He is an excellent switchable defender. He is a guy who plays bigger than his raw size and can guard fours and can guard smaller fives just because that he's used to that in the rugged Big Ten. But his ability to stay on the floor is going to be diminished if he's shooting 1 for 6 from three, because he's out there offensively not to create for himself, but to create gravity with his ability to shoot. I hope that this is something that gets fixed. Again, all evidence is that it will, because he has the best track record of anyone we could hope for, doing this for 4 years at Purdue in a team that went to the national championship game last year. But if we had to look for a bad, it would be the fact that Mason Gillis, the trend is becoming a pattern of him missing shots that by all accounts he should make. That's something that hopefully gets alleviated, because we're going to need him and his experience going into a tough environment at Arizona next week.
You mentioned that the fact that he has been 1 for 6 from three, and it's kind of becoming, again, early in the season, right? Small sample size, but we don't want that to become a trend where he's not hitting his threes, because as you mentioned, he hits his threes despite the fact that he didn't take that many last year at Purdue. He was hitting them at a pretty high clip. And so you would think that a guy who is, hitting 46% of the threes, despite the fact he's only taking one or two, like, hey, make those. And then that is something that helps the Duke offense, because defenses have to, for better or worse, got to key in on that guy. And I think the same could go for Darren Harris when he's in the game. Different ways, right? You were talking about a freshman in his 4th game in college versus a 5th-year senior who was in a national title game last year. But I think that the reason why Mason Gillis can continue to get this time, despite the fact that he's not shooting well, is because the guys behind him aren't shooting well either on the bench. And when you're on the bench, you have to understand that efficiency is the key. And that is something, again, we're nitpicking here, but I want to see the bench become more efficient when they're in the game on the offensive end. All the stuff they do on the defensive end, love it, continue it. But to stay on the floor, we need to make sure that we're not kind of going into a shooting hole when our bench is in the game, or our bench players are in the game. And so I'm hoping for, it's not just, Mason Gillis, is not just Darren Harris. It's the entire bench, not starting five. When they come into the game, they need to figure out a way to become efficient on offense, because when they are, that's when we're going to be our best selves. Because you don't want an opponent to be like, great, The bench is in. We can kind of relax a little bit. You want the bench to come in and the offense and the opponent to go, I cannot wait for the starters to get back in because these guys are taking our lunch money. And then the starters come back in and continue to do the same thing. There's no drop off on the offensive end or the defensive end. It's a lot to ask. I get it. But that's something that we want to strive for as the or as the season continues because I think all these guys have individual talent. And if John Shire's going to sit there and say, hey, throw in a Darren Harris at the 20-minute mark or the 10-minute mark and see what happens, you should be ready for that. And Darren Harris should come in and say, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to hit three threes, and then you're going to pull me out and say, good job. That's what you want. So I'm hoping for that to continue to be consistent over the next few games. And like you said, we're going to definitely need the bench against Arizona and against Kansas, which is our two next games coming up, both either on the road or in the neutral site of Vegas. Anything else from the bad before we move on?
Spencer Hubbard should have got more minutes in the 50-point blowout. I'm not
We
sure
have a
what was
stats
going.
game to win here.
I'm not sure what's going on when he's 50-point game and we're only putting him in for a minute, John. That's prime Spencer Hubbard time that was wasted. That's all I got. That's real nitpicking for to find the bad there.
You want to pick some nits? Stanley Borden should be playing in that game. We'll talk about that. Let's do that. But no, we again we say that in jest, but we really love those guys and we want them to be able to. It's a 50-point blowout. The reason why we have these is so those guys can get an opportunity to play and see the fruit of their hard work as well. And so we hope that as moving forward, we get to see as much of them as possible. Because if they're in the game, it also means that we're probably destroying the other team, which we obviously agree with. Okay, let's get to the play of the game, and I will go to you. There's a couple of obviously there's a lot of good plays, but I feel like there's a couple that stood out. So I'm wondering what yours is.
So mine was 3:15 to go in the first half. Beautiful offensive set where every single person touches the ball. Ball rotates. Tyrese Proctor gets the open three. Mason Gillis initiates. It's a high pin down with Patrick Ngongba. Khan gets the ball, drops it off to Pat, who is basically double teamed on the help. And what I thought was so encouraging, this more than anything in Pat's day, was what gave me a lot of hope, was that that's the moment where we see 9 out of 10 freshman bigs panic and travel. And he didn't. He saw the double and he immediately passed it off to Isaiah Evans in the corner. He made one more touch pass, and you were talking about those touch passes earlier to Tyrese. Tyrese has a wide open winning three. That's a play that, again, I was expecting this to be Pat's first game. He tries to go up for a dunk, doesn't see it, and travels, turns the ball over, something like that. He made a sophomore, junior level play in his first game as a freshman by making that quick pass. And again, anytime you have an offensive set where 5 guys touch the ball in the span of 5 seconds, that's beautiful offense. That is the level at which this Duke team should be aspiring to on a regular basis. That needs to be the norm, not the exception going forward.
My play of the game is in a similar vein. You mentioned the quick passing, the touch passing. And early in the second half, I thought a play was really special. There was a lot of ping pong passing. And again, it was like a touch pass here, a touch pass there. And the guys were moving the ball around the court, not just around the perimeter, but inside the paint, outside the paint, around the perimeter. Just Wofford looked like they were on skates as a team. And it ended with Caleb Foster kind of getting a touch pass alley oop to Kamen Malawach. And I thought it was brilliant because, again, I like the fact that it felt like everyone knew where they were on the floor. That even with the movement between guys, the touch passing was so crisp that it was that Wofford didn't know what to do with themselves. And it ended with, a bunch of touch passes, and then Caleb Foster kind of did a quick touch pass, and all of a sudden you see Malawach in the air with the ball, and you just see like Wofford players go, oh, we're supposed to guard that. We don't guard that. We're just gonna, go run back down to the other end of the floor. So I thought that was a good play, and that was my play of the game. Let's move to player of the week. Again, we're taking into account the Kentucky loss on Tuesday and then the Wofford victory today. Who is your player of the game? I have one that I think is pretty standout, but who do you got?
I mean, Cooper Flag's the easy answer. I think Tyrese Proctor is the right answer. I think that Tyrese Proctor had probably his best half of basketball in a Duke uniform against Kentucky. Again, there's a lot of questions about why that first half didn't extend to the second half, but I don't think we should forget that it was largely because of Tyrese that we had that 9 point lead at halftime against Kentucky. And then again today he was masterful. He in only 22 minutes he had 15 points. He shot 4 for 7 from three. He's getting good shots and he seems to be more and more comfortable with his role off the ball. I think we forget that one of the big shifts that we were expecting last year was that Tyrese being the ball dominant point guard was going to free up Jeremy Roach to be off the ball. And so Tyrese spent most of his time as the point guard, as the proverbial one. Now that has shifted. Now all of a sudden we're talking about him freeing up his offensive game, playing off the ball, while Caleb is in name only, really, but the point guard. And we're seeing that start to pay dividends. Tyrese needs to keep shooting this well. He needs to be a 40% three-point shooter for this to, continue to pay dividends down the line. But this was the first week where we saw, I think in a long time, where we saw the version of Tyrese that had lottery buzz going into last season. I don't think that's where he's going to, I think that ship may have sailed, but we're seeing glimpses of that version of Tyrese Proctor. And that's the version of Tyrese Proctor that takes this Duke team from good to great.
Tyrese Proctor had 25 points. He was one of two guys this week that had double figures in both games, the other being Kama Malawach. He had 4 rebounds, 4 assists, and 3 steals, and he was 6 of 12 from three this week. He is my player of the week. I agree with you. And again, I think it's an important player of the week because I think you would agree that Tyrese Proctor being good is good for Duke basketball. And if he is, one of those guys on the floor that is commanding his game, nobody in the country should be able to mess with this team. So I really appreciate the effort that he put in this week. He is my player of the week. Before we get out of here, anything else that we have for you while we have you? Because it's always great to have you on the show. So give it the
Oh,
floor.
why, thank you, sir. It's not like you called me up last minute and said, "Oh crap, Jason's in Vegas. We need someone's kind of."
That did happen.
That is,
Jason said, "Yeah, I can make it." Then I was like, "Jason's in Vegas. He's not going to make it." So.
and then I had to do a quick negotiation with my wife of can I take an hour out of the Saturday to hop on the pod, and it all
Yes.
worked out.
It all worked out. Appreciate the wife. Happy wife, happy life.
Exactly. So you mentioned Arizona losing last night. I watched the first half of that game. What was fascinating about that game is they fouled Wisconsin at an extraordinary rate. Wisconsin shot something like 20 free throws in the first half of that game. That is obviously an outlier. They were playing in the notorious Kohl Center, somewhere where Duke has had its own problems winning games. That's one of the low-key hardest places to win in the country. So who knows how that factored in. But that's going to be a storyline, I think, for our visit to Arizona next week, given that this is a Duke team that shot 10 for 11 from the free throw line today. By all accounts, this is a good free throw shooting Duke team. Is Arizona a foul-prone team? And if so, is that something that Duke can take advantage of? I think that could be a low-key storyline for our game next Friday.
Yeah, I agree. And I didn't see the Arizona game. I just saw the score and saw that one guy had 41 points, which 41 points in NBA terms is special. I don't know how he did that.
He shot something like 14 free throws in the first half and made them all. So
hey,
it was
light him if you got him, right?
Like, exactly. But again, that's something that I hope John Shire sees that in his film study. I'm sure he will. And if that is actually, if that is a trend that they see and isn't, just chalked up to playing in the Troll Center, which is what us Michigan fans like to call that horrible place. Mm-hmm. That is something that I hope that this Duke team can take advantage of on Friday.
Yeah, I hope so too. And we obviously will be previewing that game later in the week, probably when Jason gets back from gallivanting in Vegas. I actually will be in Vegas.
Hopefully he has enough money to be on the podcast. It doesn't sound like he's doing too good. Hopefully he still has the disposable income to take this time off.
Yeah, hopefully he has to sell his mic or something. Vegas can aim small, miss small. That's what I will do. Just as a keynote for everybody, the Kansas game that is in Vegas in a couple weeks. I will be in Vegas for that. So I will figure out a time to try and meet people before the game. It may not be like at the game because that's always hard to do. You might bump into people. But we will try to figure out a time before the game to meet up. We will obviously report that on this show once I figure that out. But that will end it for this episode of the Duke Basketball Roundup. Jason is in at the U2 experience, hopefully at this point, so he will enjoy that. I enjoyed Scott Rich being on the show. Scott, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and for all you out there, again, headlines, dbrpodcast@gmail.com. You can do that when we get to the next game against Arizona. We will preview that game sometime midweek. But until then, for Scott, for Jason that is in Sin City, I am Donald Wine. It is now time for the Duke Band to play us out and take us home.